At the first breath of dawn, before the bells tolled, the snow outside my door was unbroken, until it wasn't. 10 steps. 11. Then gone. I froze in the doorway, heart hammering like steel on stone. The prints were fresh, pressed deep, leading straight into the fog where the cliff waited. They weren't there last night. No wind had stirred, no storm had passed. Yet something had walked here, barefoot, in the hour when the world still dreams. The cold gnawed through my boots as I knelt beside the first impression. It was human, but too perfect. No stumble, no drag. I followed them until the village roofs vanished behind me, swallowed by white silence. They stopped at the cliff's edge, where sea and sky were the same endless gray. I stared down into the mist and saw my reflection looking back from far below. But it wasn't mine. The villagers said the snow kept secrets. They whispered that the wind carried the voices of those who never returned. As I walked back toward Frostmere, every step echoed too loud, as if something followed in perfect rhythm behind me. No birds sang. No dogs barked. Only the groan of ice and the faint whisper of sea far below. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that the dawn tricks the eyes when one has slept little, but I could still feel the pull of that last footprint hanging over the abyss. Someone had walked there. Someone had looked down, and something had looked back. At the tavern, men spoke in low tones, glancing at the windows as though the storm itself listened. They'd seen the prince too, years ago, before the last hunting party vanished. I asked who they belonged to, but no one answered. Only one old man muttered that the snow remembers every sin. When I pressed him, he spat into the fire and said, "Don't follow what walks before dawn, tracker. You'll find yourself behind it soon enough." His eyes never left the flames. When the night came, I couldn't sleep. The prince haunted my mind. The perfect shape, the path too deliberate. I stepped outside again, lantern trembling in my hand. Snow had begun to fall anew, erasing every trace of morning. I waited for peace to return with the wind, but peace never came. Somewhere in the distance, faintly, I heard it. A second set of footsteps, soft and slow, pacing just beyond the light. The next dawn broke blood red. Snow clung to every branch like shrouds. The villagers gathered by the well, silent, staring toward the pines. New footprints had appeared, smaller this time, lighter, and they led the same way as before. I gripped the hilt of my hunting knife, feeling the weight of choice. Fear whispered that I should turn away, but the wind carried another whisper, one that sounded like my name. The forest stood waiting, hushed beneath its crown of frost. I followed the new footprints past the well and into the pines, the snow deep enough to swallow each step with a sigh. The air grew colder the farther I went, until even the wind dared not move. Between the trees, a faint sound echoed. Bells, delicate as glass, chiming in the distance. I knew there were no bells in that direction. Still, I followed, until I found the first sign of her, a sprig of green, impossibly alive, resting on untouched snow. Someone had left it there, knowing I would come. The forest floor was laced with tracks, some human, some not. At times the prints overlapped, as though several had walked the same path, one after another, into the same disappearance. I crouched beside a narrow stream half frozen in the snow and saw in the mirrored surface a second reflection beside mine. I turned, but no one stood there. Only trees, shifting slightly as if breathing. Then came a voice, soft as snowfall. "You shouldn't have come alone." I spun toward the sound and she stepped out from the mist. She said she'd seen the prince before. Every winter since her sister vanished, each year they returned, appearing from the forest's heart and ending at the cliff. "The Pale One calls them home," she whispered, pressing the sprig of green into my palm. "That's winterbane. It grows only where the dead still dream." Her words carried no tremor, only sorrow. I asked why she had followed me into the forest. She didn't answer. She only looked past me, to where the prints were already filling with snow. We walked together beneath the skeletal branches, her lantern swaying gently in the cold air. The footprints began to blur, yet I sensed their direction. Always toward the sea, always toward the... Lyora spoke of her sister's laughter echoing in storms of shapes moving behind the snow when the moon rose. "The pale one wears the faces of the lost," she said. "It walks until someone follows." I asked what it wanted. She looked at me and whispered, "You." The light trembled between us. By the time we reached the forest's edge, night was already claiming the sky. The cliff waited beyond, silent and white as bone. I told her I would follow the prints to their end, but she caught my arm and shook her head. "It's not the prints you're following," she said, voice trembling now. "It's memory, for a heartbeat." I almost turned back, but then the wind rose, carrying a whisper that sounded like my own voice calling from the abyss, and I stepped forward into the dark. By morning, frost had sealed the doors of Frostmere. The wind carried the scent of salt and smoke from the sea. I sought the chapel, the only place where sound still held weight. Its old bell hung silent, its iron tongue frozen mid-prayer. Inside, Brother Cale knelt before the altar, his back bowed beneath years of faith and fear. "You've been walking the same road as the dead," he murmured without turning. His voice cracked the stillness like a breaking branch. "The cliff isn't the end. It's the threshold." I asked what lay beyond. He only shuddered and whispered, "That depends on who remembers you." The walls were carved with symbols, spirals and waves that shimmered faintly beneath the frost. Cale traced one with a trembling hand. "Long before Frostmere," he said, "this place was called Ronfell. The Pale One guarded its edge. It was no demon then, only a keeper. But when the first settlers broke their oath and hunted past the boundary, it learned to take their names." His voice faltered. "Do you dream of the cliff?" I hesitated before answering. "Every night," I said. His eyes softened with pity, or warning. When I stepped outside, the bell tolled. Slow, hollow, mournful. Yet the rope hung still. No one had pulled it. The sound rolled through the snowbound streets, echoing off frozen walls until the entire village seemed to breathe in unison. From every door, faces appeared, frightened, pale, expectant. The bell tolled again, and every villager turned toward the cliffs. I followed their gaze. A dark figure stood there against the light of the rising sun. I ran toward the figure, each stride heavier than the last as the snow thickened, swallowing my legs like quicksand. The closer I drew, the clearer the outline became, tall, cloaked, motionless. When I called out, the voice that answered was my own. The echo reverberated from the mist, repeating words I hadn't spoken in years. I froze. It knew my name, and worse, it knew my silence. When I reached the cliff, the figure was gone. Only the footprints remained, 2 sets now, mine and its side by side, ending together at the brink. I turned, breath shuddering, and saw Lyora standing among the pines. She said nothing. Her face was pale as the snow, eyes wide with something I couldn't name. The bell tolled again behind us, louder, closer. She stepped forward and whispered, "It knows you remember." Then the wind rose, and she was gone. The storm came without warning. Snow swept through Frostmere like white fire, blinding, relentless, swallowing the world. I waited through the night, yet when dawn returned, the footprints had not vanished. They multiplied. Dozens of trails crisscrossed the village square, winding in perfect spirals, encircling every door. No one dared step outside. From my window, I watched the patterns form and fade, as though the snow itself were breathing. Then I saw it, the center of the spiral, right outside my door, where no one had walked but me. When I stepped into the center, the wind stopped. The world fell utterly still. Every sound was drawn inward, folded into silence. Then I heard a whisper beneath the snow, muffled, human. I knelt, brushed away the frost, and saw shapes buried beneath the surface. Hands, faces, fragments of clothing long frozen into the earth. My stomach turned. These were the vanished ones. Trapped beneath the spiral's heart, the whisper grew louder until I could make out the words. Remember what you left behind. The whispers followed me when I fled the square. Every wall seemed to breathe. Every shadow moved just beyond sight. I found myself before the chapel again, though I hadn't meant to return. The door hung open, and the bell rope swayed though no wind stirred. Inside, the pews were empty, except for one figure sitting in silence, back turned toward me. My heart stopped as I recognized the cloak. It was mine! I circled the figure, step by step until I faced it. My own eyes stared back, vacant, rimmed with frost. The doppelganger did not breathe. When I reached out, its skin cracked like thin ice, and a gust of cold burst forth, carrying a whisper in my voice. You shouldn't have followed. I stumbled back, drawing my blade. But the echo of my movements lingered, as if the figure continued them half a beat later, like a reflection trapped in another time. Then, it smiled. I fled into the storm, though it felt more like falling than running. The village blurred behind me, lost in gray. The footprints led me now. They twisted through the forest, looping upon themselves, circling until direction lost all meaning. I realized too late. They weren't leading anywhere. They were closing in. Each step echoed nearer, though I no longer knew if it was mine or something else. Then I heard the bell again, distant but sure, calling from the cliffs. The bell's voice drew me through the forest like a spell. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became until even the snow stopped crunching underfoot. Only the distant toll remained, slow, deliberate, as if counting down. The trees thinned, the air sharpened, and then the sea appeared beyond a veil of mist. The cliff waited, patient as death. The footprints wound ahead of me, smaller now, lighter. And I knew, though I wished I didn't, whose they were. At the cliff's edge, I found remnants of those who came before. An old hunting horn, a rusted blade, a charm of bones bound by red thread. The wind rose from the abyss, carrying whispers that overlapped like voices in prayer. I listened, though every word scraped against something deep in me. They spoke my name with tenderness and accusation alike. Then, beneath the chorus, another voice emerged, familiar, steady, impossibly close. It called not from below, but from within. I turned to find Lyora standing a few paces behind. Her cloak fluttered, eyes glistening like thawing ice. "It isn't calling you," she said. "It's remembering you." Her voice trembled, yet she did not step closer. "When the storm took your wife, you swore to find her. Every winter since, you followed these footprints, your own, from that night." The truth settled like lead in my chest. "Then why do they always return?" I asked. "Because you never do," she whispered. Now, the wind howled then, a voice made of storm. From the mist below, a pale figure rose, neither man nor woman, faceless yet familiar. The air warped around it, the snow suspended in mid-fall. I felt warmth leave my body as it lifted its hand toward me, palm open. I stepped closer, unable to resist, the world narrowing to that single gesture. Behind me, Lyora screamed, but the sound was already fading, swallowed by the roar of the sea. The touch never came. Instead, I saw myself reflected in its form. Every sin, every winter, every lost promise bound together by the same snow. The pale one leaned closer, its breath colder than memory. "You left her," it said in my own voice. "Now remember." And I did. The night she called for help, the blizzard, the fear that drove me back instead of forward. I fell to my knees as the sea roared, the sound of the bell breaking one last time. When I looked up, the footprints behind me were gone. Only one path remained, forward, into the mist. The world beyond the cliff was neither sky nor sea, only a pale void where time folded in on itself. I stood within it, weightless. Yet the cold pressed against me like stone. The pale one drifted before me, its form shifting between light and shadow, between human and something older. "Do you remember her voice?" it asked, though no mouth moved. The air itself spoke. Images flickered, firelight, laughter, snow swirling around a doorway. A hand reaching for mine, then slipping away. "You closed the door," it whispered. "You survived the storm." She did not. The void shifted into the memory itself. I stood again before my hut on the night of the storm, hearing her cries carried through the wind. Fear had bound me then, tighter than frost. I had bolted the door and waited for dawn, telling myself the blizzard would pass, that she would find shelter. The pale one watched as I relived it, its eyes flickering with her voice. "You prayed for the snow to bury her," it said. I fell to my knees, hands sinking through the ghost of that night. "I prayed to forget," I answered. "You cannot forget what remembers you," said the pale one. It touched my forehead and the cold surged through me. Not pain, but knowing. The footprints, the whispers, the reflection in the cliff's mist, all were fragments of myself repeating the same search, trapped between guilt and longing. "You made me," it said gently. "Every winter that you returned, you called me back." I realized then the pale one was not death, but memory unburied, shaped by the cold to remind the living of their debt. The light dimmed, and the wind shifted. Beneath the layers of snow, I saw countless figures moving, every soul who had vanished, walking together toward the horizon. Among them, she turned to look at me, her face serene, her touch forgiving. "Let go," she whispered, and in that instant the storm calmed. The pale one's form began to dissolve, its features softening into wind and snow. "Your penance is done," it said. "But the world forgets quickly. Someone must remember." When I opened my eyes, I stood once more at the cliff's edge. The sky had cleared. The sea below was calm, reflecting dawn like a blade of light. My breath came steady for the first time in years. The footprints stretched behind me, mine, hers, and none at all. I looked toward the village where smoke rose quietly from hearths. I could return, or I could step forward and finally join the silence that waited. The wind carried her laughter once more. I smiled and took a single step. The storm ended as suddenly as it began. Frostmere awoke beneath a quiet sky, the snow gleaming as though the heavens had poured glass upon the earth. The villagers emerged one by one, blinking into the dawn. They found no trace of chaos, only calm, and the faint sound of waves far below the cliffs. The chapel bell lay cracked upon the ground, its tongue still warm to the touch. The old tracks were gone, swept clean by the night's breath, all but one, a single trail leading once more toward the sea. Lyora stood apart from the others, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders. The air felt weightless now, emptied of its ghosts. Yet when she closed her eyes, she could still hear him. The steady rhythm of his steps, the whisper of fur brushing snow. She walked to the place where his prints began, kneeling to trace one with her gloved hand. The impression was warm beneath the frost. For a moment she thought she heard her name spoken softly, not from the sea, but from the air itself. She followed the prints beyond the tree line where frost-laden branches bent low, forming arches of glass. Each step seemed to echo through another time. The footprints led her past the place where the spiral once marked the snow, but now the ground was smooth, untouched. Still, she kept walking, though she no longer knew what she sought. An answer, a farewell, or perhaps the same silence that had taken him. The wind rose and carried a whisper. Someone must remember. When she reached the cliff, the world was still. The sea below shimmered like a mirror. No mist, no storm, only endless quiet. She stood where his footprints ended and looked down. Her reflection stared back, unbroken. In it, she saw him, smiling faintly, fading like breath on glass. Tears froze on her lashes. She whispered a prayer not for his return, but for his rest. Then she turned away, leaving no mark behind her. By evening, frost crept once more across Frostmere's roofs. The villagers whispered that the storm had taken another, yet they felt no fear, only reverence, as if something sacred had passed. In the distance beyond the pines, a single crow cried, then fell silent. The snow remained still until dawn. When the first light broke, new footprints crossed the fields again. Small, certain, leading toward the cliff's edge. And this time, they belonged to her.